Welcome back to 20 Before 20. I can officially say welcome back now because this is our second episode of our new podcast, 20 Before 20, where simply we spend 20 minutes talking to an artist or a band before they come to downtown Lake Orion and play 20 Front Street. My name's Kevin Bessert. I'm part of the team here at 20 Front Street, and I'm super excited about this month's guest. When I took a look at the November calendar, this name kind of jumped off the page to me because we consider him one of the 20 Front Street originals because he's been with us from the very start, and that is
Yeah.
Mr. Tony Lucca. Tony, thanks so much for taking the time and agreeing to
Hey,
do this.
thank you, man. And I got no problems being second. The truth is the first follower is in fact the second leader, so I'll take it.
Love it. Yeah, and you let me work the kinks out with the first one before I got to you. So before we dive in, Tony will be in Lake Orion. Just want to promo this right off the get go. He'll be in at 20 Front Street Thanksgiving weekend for two shows, November 29th and 30th. Tickets are still available at 20frontstreet.com, but they are going fast, so jump online and grab those.
Yeah.
So to jump in, Tony, I mentioned there at the beginning that we kind of consider you a 20 Front Street original, and a couple of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is you grew up in this area, spent a lot of your childhood here, went to Clarkson High School. Start there. Talk a little bit about growing up here, some of your memories, your childhood in this area, and do you still have family and friends in the area?
I do actually. My folks are actually back in Michigan now, and they recently just got a house in Clarkston, so they're getting real close to where things started for me. Yeah, man. Like like most kids in the Clarkston school district, I was a big sports guy. Played basketball, football, ran track, and I think I had my first triple double against Lake Orion.
Messed around and had a triple double. Love it.
I was really feeling it that night. No, but yeah, like it. But come like ninth grade is when I went off and started doing TV and stuff with the Mickey Mouse Club and all that, and I kind of pivoted from the sports thing and got it more into the arts, I suppose. But it really just from that point on, from ninth grade on, it really became more just me coming back to the area from like the late fall into the early spring, and then I would be back out on my way back down to Florida for the production of the show. So I was kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But I did start and finish. I got my diploma from Clarkston, so I went from kindergarten all the way through my senior year in the Clarkston School District. So it's always felt like home. Every time I come back to the area, it's always great to see old friends and family and stuff. So
And the second piece of me referring to you as kind of an original with us is, yeah, from the very beginning, when we had this crazy idea to open a live music venue in downtown Lake Orion, right from the get go, anytime we had an idea or wanted you to come back for a show, you were always down, and we're incredibly appreciative of that. And now you've been with us plenty of times over. We just celebrated our 8-year anniversary, and you've been with us plenty of times, and we're looking forward to this next idea in November.
yeah, man, exactly. It's always so cool to well for me, you have to imagine like as someone who went off and got into music and the arts and stuff and got into the singer-songwriter lane and started touring the country and finding all these little sweet hot spots from New York to LA to everywhere in between, and then to learn that just as I was kind of catching my stride with my craft, that one of these little godsend hotspots just pops up in near my hometown, and now I get to come home not just because it's time to go home, but it's like I get to play a gig at 20 Front. Let's go. Yeah.
Like I said, we can't thank you enough for that. But let's go back to that, kind of what got you to that point. So you say you're at Clarkson High School. You do leave early, I believe, at the age of like 14, because the Mickey
Yeah.
Mouse Club opportunity that takes you to Florida,
Hmm.
and then kind of describe the journey from there. After that ends, you end up out in L.A., I think, to do some acting, and then it was after that that the kind of music thing kind of came more to the forefront.
Yeah, it did. I mean, music was always what brought me. It was how I got into the door of the Mickey Mouse Club because I was predominantly a singer and a performer and kind of learned the acting and the dancing thing along the way. But
Sure.
music was always where my heart was. And, on the heels of the show, when it got, when they finally canceled the show and we were all kind of free to go do what we wanted to do with our careers, I jumped right out to LA, but I
Yep.
went out there with the aspiration of like, who knows, maybe it'll be music, maybe it'll be acting. go with where the wind blows kind of thing. And there was, because in the acting world it is a little more formulaic in that if you get a good manager, you get a good agent, next thing you know you're working, and that's really what wound up happening. So I just was like, oh hey, this is all momentum, and maybe at some point I'll get to do the music thing. Well, as the acting thing kind of started to snowball, I started learning, like, hang on a second, there's some weird double standards with music and acting, and if you do one first, then you can't do the other later, and then vice versa. And I didn't ever want to get pigeonholed as like
into one.
some, yeah,
Yeah.
some TV actor who couldn't go have a credible, artistically, legit music career. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna pivot and head over into music, and just kind of dove in head first and really didn't look back. I just really put it all on the line for my music around 2021.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, and I know even before you released some independent albums, and we'll get to those in a while because I know we're gonna play some of those cover to cover when you come in November. But so you
Yeah.
started out kind of independently, and I know there was these albums that we'll get to, and your career was kind of mostly independent. Was that what led up to The Voice?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple different what we refer to as trips down the altar, trips to the altar, as far as like record deals that emerged and different opportunities that looked promising and whatnot. But over the course of a long time, it was just ultimately just me, my drive to keep making music and continue touring, that got me to a point where, like, okay, I felt like I had done enough that would my music, my craft would speak for itself. I think I had made like 7 albums, 6 or 7 albums, and a
Wow.
number of EPs and a couple DVDs. Like, okay, hey, look, I haven't quite cracked the code on how to become a big deal. So when the voice opportunity came along, I was like, you know what? Yeah, this is, why not? It was kind of just a, let's see what this yields. If nothing else, I should be able to make a few more new fans, and maybe this will help take my independent touring career to the next level. And long story short, that's basically what happened with the voice thing.
And The Voice has become such a kind of mainstream thing now in the industry. But you were on season 2, so that was pretty early on in that process. How did that opportunity come to you? And at that point, you didn't have the kind of foresight to know what that could lead to, like a lot of young artists do now.
Yeah, exactly. And I was suspicious. Sure,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know, man. Because I think technically, I don't think I was ever qualified to do American Idol when that show came out, because basically, I think I may have always just been too old. But more importantly, the restriction on that show was that you couldn't have had a professional
Previous deal.
career,
Yeah.
right. And I had already had some of that, certainly with the Mickey Mouse Club and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't a total unknown. Whereas on The Voice, they're like, hey, we want those
Sure.
redemption
Sure.
stories. We want those former industry professionals. And so I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. But I think the fact that Christina Aguilera, who was a former co-star on the Mickey Mouse Club with me, the fact that she was a coach on the show was like, yeah, maybe I got to see what this is all about.
Sure. Sure.
I think my curiosity got the best of me, and so I was like, let's just see what happens if I do this. And the rest is kind of history.
And before we go back to kind of the start in those early albums, post Voice, then I guess that momentum that built there. I mean, did you really notice the difference there that your career kind of did take that big jump after that show?
I did, yeah. I mean, it did. There was basically like a full year where I went and just toured like crazy on the heels of that, and it was like a victory lap sort of thing, just a chance to go out, meet some new fans. But what was surprising to me was a little more so than making a bunch of new fans, was that like all of my old fans kind of came out of the woodwork from all these years of doing this independent thing, and they were like, yo, oh my gosh, so congratulations, I am so stoked to see you're still doing it. And it's like, yeah. So it was just really encouraging, and it felt like, all right, this had the desired effect. Sure, instead of selling like 75 to 120 tickets a night, I was upwards of 200 to 300 tickets in some markets, and that was like, that's quantifiable. Like
Sure,
okay,
sure.
this is real gains. And it was exciting. I did sign to Adam Levine's label on the shortly after the show.
Yep.
Played some shows with Maroon 5 and Kelly Clarkson, and it was definitely like it felt like things were kind of taking off again. It was really exciting, a really exciting time. But just much like these other trips to the altar, like I've said, the deal kind of came and went, and at the end of
Yep.
the day, it was about me picking myself back up and deciding that I'm still going to keep doing this independently and keep going, and I did.
One last question on that before we move on. There's so many artists that come through 20 Front Street now currently who end up on The Voice in one fashion or another. There's someone this season I just happened to see the other day who's played 20 Front Street several times. Is that still an avenue that you would recommend to a young artist, whether it be Idol or Voice, to do something like that? Is that something you would recommend to someone to kind of touch on what you touched on, just to give that career that little boost?
I think it's unique per person and per where they are in their craft or their career or their aspirations. I think everyone learned fairly quickly with The Voice, at least, that people ask me, "Do you think I should do The Voice?" And I'm like, "Well, you wouldn't be asking me if you didn't feel like you could sing and you had a decent voice. So let's just set that aside. My more important question is, what's your story? Because that clearly became what The Voice was leaning into, was the stories of
Sure.
these young, emerging independent artists that are out there still. And if you've got a compelling story, then that's like having a really good voice, and then, oh, you got another really good voice. Like you've got this package kind of thing. Because obviously that's, I mean, I held my own as a singer on that show, but clearly the fact that I had worked with Christina,
Yep.
and then quickly that became like this little back and forth between her and Adam. It became some exciting TV until
Sure.
they, just kind of overdid it, I think. But so yeah, I'm always asking people, like, hey, what do you want? What is your why? Like,
Yep.
what are you
Yep.
in this for? What do you think best case scenario would be the case if you did The Voice? Like, what would you hope to happen? Do you really want a record deal through that? Do you want just some exposure? Do you want the validation? Do you want some encouragement? Do you want to get a chance to work with a world class celebrity coach? I mean, you can't put a price tag on
Oh,
what those
absolutely.
people can offer your career, let alone like maybe some legitimate opportunities that can emerge on the heels of that. So it's I wouldn't talk anybody out of it, but I would definitely, like, walk them through their thinking process a little bit, maybe, before they
Sure.
take that
That's great.
dive.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your shows coming up at 20 Front Street in November. I mentioned at the beginning, you're always down for crazy ideas when we come up with them. You and I talked about you coming Thanksgiving weekend and doing not one night but two. And so you and I had a little back and forth about, hey, if we're going to do 2 nights, maybe we could do something cool, something different, so that the 2 nights wouldn't be exactly alike. And I think it was you that came up with the idea of, hey, how about I play a couple of my older albums from start to finish each night.
Yeah.
I love the idea. That's exactly what we're going to do on November 29th and 30th. So let's talk about those two albums. Friday night,
Yeah.
you're going to play Canyon songs start to finish. Uh,
Hmm.
let's talk about that album a little bit. What is it about that album? I mean, some of these songs now are 20 years old.
Hmm.
When you think about that album, what memories or what do you think about those songs, that collection of songs, and what can the fans expect when you play that on Friday night?
Yeah, that was a real big turning point for me in my craft. Was like, I think my first couple albums, I was just shooting from the hip, just trying everything, just really all of the artistic freedom I could possibly imagine. My records were like a little more. My first album specifically back in '97 was very you know, adult contemporary, almost like wave jazz. I was a big jazz fan, in high school and thereafter, and so I was very Sting sort of, Dream of the Blue Turtles kind of thing, and I just had no fear about that. I had no thoughts about what the industry would expect or what it should sound like. I just did what I wanted. The second album, tried to tighten that up and make it a little more accessible. And then, Shotgun, which we'll be doing on the Saturday night
Yeah.
show, we can talk about that in a second. That was me really trying to get onto that, like, John Mayer, Matchbox 20, Goo Goo Dolls, sort of pop acoustic music songwriter thing. But Canyon Songs was definitely, I was living up in Laurel Canyon when I started working on that album. And
Yep.
for those that don't know, Laurel Canyon was the home of like Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Mamas and the Papas. There was this huge, it was mecca for singer-songwriter music and eclectic, the Eagles, and it was folky, but it was also classic rock at the same time. And I was a big fan of all that music, so I wanted to kind of make like an homage to that. And all the songs on that record were either written and or recorded up in Laurel Canyon and Beechwood Canyon. So it just made it kind of became its own concept album. I just called it Canyon Songs, and even though it's a bit eclectic, it all fits under that umbrella in my head, in my opinion.
So cool. And I was going to ask you kind of the differences between the two albums, but you kind of described there the differences. But I guess thinking of it, when was the last time, or have you ever kind of since then at a live performance sat down and played those albums from start to finish before? And what's that like compared to just your typical show night where you'd kind of play a collection of all different albums?
Yeah, I don't know that I've done. I did do like a 10-year anniversary of Canyon Songs live, top to bottom, and that was cool. Like we were really trying to go for recreating sonically each song, and I hired different musicians to kind of really flesh it out, so it sounded as much like a live representation of the album as possible, and that was cool. But it's definitely like you find that there are more fans of the record that come to see those songs and listen to them, not just your average, hey, let's go see Tony, he's playing, let's go see what he's
Yeah.
doing. It was definitely people that were fans of the record and enjoyed me playing it in order and all that kind of stuff. I think where the idea really came from though was during the lockdown, the pandemic, when we all started live
Yep.
streaming. A lot of guys like myself, I mean, I was doing at one point, I think 2 shows a week,
I
from the
remember that.
basement. And yeah, and after a while, it's like, well, what am I gonna do this time? What am I gonna do this time? So finally, I was like, let's just maybe go ahead and play through my entire catalog.
Yeah.
Tuesday I'm gonna play this album. Thursday I'll play this album, and I just it was a really cool way to kind of reflect and go back through the catalog and relearn some of these songs. My gosh, some of
For
them
sure.
like, the deeper cuts on these albums I haven't played live in 20 years. So I definitely enjoyed it. It put me to work. It just allowed me to kind of sharpen up on things. It got me all nostalgic and going back through like
Love it.
where these songs came from, retelling the stories now with a lot of life experience and perspective that I didn't have back then. It's just it makes for a really cool storytellers kind of thing, which I always enjoy.
And which I think our room lends so well to. So we're
Oh
super,
God,
super,
yeah,
super excited for those shows coming up in November. Couple
yeah,
of things I want to touch on before we run out of time. I know one new thing in the world of Tony Lucca. This year was kind of a different year for you as you took a little bit of a step back from your own music and being a front man to join full time in 2023 the Brett Young Band. Talk
yeah.
to me a little bit about that experience of going from being the front man or doing your own music to joining a band and getting to really tour all over with Brett and I know some of your other friends. What was that
Yeah.
experience? What was that experience like in 2023 of being part of his band?
And I'll tell you, man, it is really wild because I didn't imagine I would enjoy it as much as I have clearly gone on to enjoy it. It's been a really great time. I can't tell you how adjacent it is to like my childhood dream of getting up on stage every night in front of thousands
The
of
people,
people.
yeah,
It's just like I feel right at home. I feel uniquely qualified to be there. And the fact that I have history with Brett and other members of the band makes it just a piece of cake. It's kind of a dream gig in a lot of ways. And we're traveling the world. My God, I've been to Europe twice now, Hawaii twice. We're going to do Australia and Canada and more Europe in 25. So I'm really excited about it, man. It's been really great. It's been nice to like have a steady thing, and personally, quite honestly, after COVID, when we were all just like chomping at the bit to get the venues back open and
yep,
to get back out there and get your routing together and get your shows, you start driving around the country again like I was before, and the margins just weren't there, man. Like the people weren't coming out yet. It was just like really disheartening and really hard to kind of get fired up to get back out there again. And so when this opportunity came along, the timing really felt kind of just right. Like, all right, you know what? Maybe I'll go do this for a few. I've been at this 25 years now.
Sure.
What's a few years going over and doing this thing where I'll sharpen my skill sets, I'll travel the world, I'll play music professionally, I'll take a steady paycheck. I mean, all of the pros outweigh the cons by a mile. And what's been really cool is that I've been able to afford myself still, shoehorning and piggybacking shows onto weekends out with Brett. So I'm still playing in a lot of my favorite, preferred markets and venues, and getting back out to meet the promoters and talent buyers and club owners and guys that I was, friends and family with now
Sure.
for 20 years. I'm still able to kind of do that, and I've got fans that are still staying tuned and willing to come out and support that.
So I always like to ask, what's next? What's the next year going to look like? So for you in the next year, is it going to be a little bit out with Brett and a little bit of doing some solo stuff? Is that what the next year looks like?
Yeah, it's more of the same. I'm gonna kind of stay put with Brett for now, and yeah, I've already been reaching out to venues and promoters and stuff about trying to, like I said, piggyback on
Piggyback some
some
gigs.
dates when I'm in the markets that it makes sense, and I've got those days off to do that. I think It's probably time for me to put out another full length album of new music, and I've got some concepts for a little project I want to put together next year. Whether that comes out next year, we'll see. But it's been nice, working on the weekends with Brett, basically Wednesday through Sunday morning, and then I come home here into my studio, and I've got 3 or 4 days to write and produce and create new music. So if I get that balance right and I get into that workflow, anything's possible. But yeah, I'm definitely like excited to put something out and make sure that the fans that have been following me through all of this are still getting the goods.
Cool. We're not going to hold you to a timeline, but at least the tease of a new album is out there. We'll take that for now.
Yeah,
All
man.
right. So believe it or not, we've run out of time here. So I always like to close, even though this is only episode number 2. I kind of have my closing question I'm going to pose to every artist that I bring on the podcast, and
All right.
that closing question is, who's someone you're listening to right now, or maybe someone you saw recently live, or someone that's kind of blowing your mind right now that's just getting some heavy spins on your playlist right now?
Ah, man, most of the music that I'm listening to on my downtime is with my kids, and fortunately, they have really great taste in music. My daughter and I are, scoping out all the latest trends and new bands and stuff. They turned me on to Cage the Elephant, which is they've
Yeah.
been around a while now, but my kids are both into them, and got to see them live this summer, and it was like my daughter and I went to a concert together. Like, how crazy is this? I went and saw Chili Peppers in '92 at Lollapalooza in Orlando, and my
Yeah.
daughter just went to Bonnaroo to see him in 2024. It's like, it's so wild and crazy. But yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of some of the newer music that I've been digging. That's kind of maybe under the radar. I've been listening to a lot more country, obviously, now that I'm in
With
country
Brett. Yeah.
music. Trying to write a lot of country music for up and coming country artists and that sort of thing. But yeah, man, what's the latest album that really really got me that I was into? It's a tough one, man. Uh, I don't know if there's anything specifically. There's a band that my kids got me into called Peach Pit, and
Okay.
I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of their handful of albums, and they've got a new album out. And my daughter and I keep putting it on, trying to warm to it. You know how a new record can be sometimes. You're like, I don't like this, and then like 3 listens in, you're like, this is my jam.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So we've been spending time with Peach Pit's new record that recently dropped, and we'll see if that grows in popularity on our spin list. So.
Well, that last question is always is a very selfish question, because I just like to know what people are listening to. It's a common question, so
Yeah.
I just like to put that out there to see if there's something that's kind of under the radar that's getting some heavy spins from you. So, hey
Yeah,
man,
man.
thanks again for doing this. 20 minutes
My pleasure,
does go
dude.
by so fast. Once again, though,
Yes, it
I
does.
do want to mention that Tony is going to be back home in Lake Orion, November 29th and 30th. 2 different nights. Again, he's going to play Canyon Songs Friday night, Shotgun on Saturday night. Tickets are still available at 20frontstreet.com, but they are moving fast. So grab your tickets, and we'll see you in November.
Can't wait, dude.
All right. Thanks a lot for doing this, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yep.
See you, buddy.